Okay,
Has a political censor too.
okay. We're gonna get started here, so now be careful what you say, Rob.
Why should I start now?
Now you have nothing to lose.
I don't know that I did before either.
I know. My people always told me that the thing that would get me into the most trouble up here was my mouth. They were right.
We're on air.
Okay,
All right.
all right, here we are. On air. This is,
Sunset Advisory Commission.
and it is August 23rd, 22nd, sorry about that. And we are going to this morning start by looking at the parole board. Well, first of all, before we start, I think that what we need to do is welcome Tracy, our newest member.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. And do you want to tell us what your position is in the administration?
I am the new appointments director for Governor Scott. I was the scheduler for 5.5 years. And this is, just as I suspected, a brand new giant challenge. So
Good.
it got me a seat here. So yeah.
Welcome.
So when we have suggestions for board appointments,
Please.
or when we decide we want to be on a board.
I saw Kendall. Kendall planted that seed. I did see that.
Yeah, she did. So, well, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So
Yes.
just have a quick question, Matt. On the new spreadsheet here, do I make the assumption that it's updated from the last one as far as, because I went through, made a lot of notes as far as maintain and deletes and was that all
Yes.
updated? So I can throw one away confidently?
Recycle it.
Yes.
Well,
Yes, Dad.
can you throw in the right bin for me?
Yes, put that responsibility on John.
The one right behind.
There you
Okay,
go.
There. Okay, good. I will do the same thing because I have my old one right here.
I would be happy to do that for you.
Thank you. All right, so should we get started? Mary Jane, do you want to come up and, are you Dawn?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay, come on. Now, I'm sure that you know what this committee was set up to determine whether we have boards and commissions that are no longer necessary. Not that we think the parole board is no longer necessary, but we are looking at all the boards and commissions that are created by the legislature or the governor and determining whether they need to continue to exist. And if they do, are there statutory changes that would make their lives easier? Because sometimes the statutes were written 40 years ago when a board was set up and things have changed. So that's where we are. So today we are looking at the parole board. And I think that before we let you go, we'll introduce ourselves so that you know who we are. Do you want to start, Brian?
Sure. Senator Collmore, representing the Rutland District.
I'm Tracy DeLude. I'm the appointments director for the governor.
I'm Jeanette White from Wyndham County.
John Gannon, representing Halifax, Whitingham, and Wilmington in southern Vermont.
Rob Leclerc representing Berrytown.
I'm Matt Kraus. I'm one of the gubernatorial appointees.
And we have with us Ameren, who is our
Legislative Council.
legislative counsel and takes care of us, and Andrea, who takes care of us in other ways. So, thank you. Okay, would you like to jump in here?
All right, good morning. I'm Mary Jane Ainsworth. I'm the director of the parole board. I filled out the survey that you asked for. I'm not really sure exactly what you're looking for, but I'll just talk a little bit about the board. The board is Over the last couple of years, the Justice Reinvestment Initiative has really changed a little bit of how we do business. We've gone through some statutory change with eligibility for parole. There was an addition of a presumptive parole status, which could potentially expand the amount of parolees. Really part of the Justice Reinvestment Initiative was to try to transition more supervised individuals, incarcerated individuals onto parole when they are released from a facility versus onto a furlough status, as parole has more due process in the fact that if they do allegedly violate a condition of release, a parole condition, they have the right to a counsel, legal counsel, and an attorney can help them with their violation proceeding. So that was one of the main reasons. Also, there was a lot of confusion between furlough, parole, and what the hierarchy was and not. And now it's more, we have correctional incarcerated status and then community supervision. Now furlough and parole are more similar, just depending on who they report to if they violate.
Yeah, I think that I sat on the Judiciary Committee, and there's a lot of confusion around furlough and what that meant and what it was. So I think that the clarifications that came out of the last few sessions were, I don't know if anybody else paid attention to that or not, but yeah.
It's probably not part of this, but it's, why was there a need to feel they need more due process?
I think just having the addition of an attorney to help them navigate the violation process. There was also, it gives them more of an opportunity where previously with furlough, they would potentially go in and out. There was a lot of in and outs, like short interrupts sentences or sanctions. And there was really the look at the whole, what does it take to return a person into a facility? What kind of behavior and so forth. And I think it's just an impartial board looking at the behavior and looking at, it makes it more of a quasi judicial process versus one hearing officer looking at a case, going back, and then the supervised individuals kind of on their own. They might have an ability to have a hearing assistant that's another incarcerated individual to help them, but they don't really have that counsel through the Prisoner's Rights Office to help them navigate through the process.
I think there's a misunderstanding of what furlough was, because furlough was just, you're out there. Maybe you just want to take a minute to just talk about what furlough was and how you could just be sent back like that.
So furlough is an extension of I'm trying to think of is an extension of incarceration out in the community. It's under the purview of the Commissioner of Corrections. So the commissioner doesn't decide, but through case planning, somebody can be released onto furlough. But if you allegedly violate your conditions of furlough, DOC can return you, and you within, I think it's either 4 or 7 days, would have a notice of suspension hearing, which is to suspend your furlough. And at that time, the individual is kind of on their own to navigate what kind of evidence do I need to present, what do I need to prove whether they did it or did not do that violation. Where with parole, they can be returned. We have it happen all the time. They can get incarcerated pending their violation hearing. Then they have the opportunity to request an attorney through Prisoner's Rights or their own, or they cannot be represented. I'd say 99% are represented by the Prisoner's Rights Office, and they help them navigate presenting evidence and presenting their case and they can also help them present their case of why their parole should not be revoked and go back and stay in jail in a facility or not, or what they can do. It helps them present a release plan as well of what they can do outside to kind of, whether it's treatment, residential treatment, et cetera.
Okay, thank you for that description.
Yeah, no problem.
To sort of circle back to what we're here talking about.
Sure.
In a scenario like that, does the parole board have any role or involvement? Or is it all before the fact and then that's dealt with separately? In other words, you have somebody that's out on parole, run afoul of it. Do you folks have any involvement with it?
The only time we have it, so when somebody's out on parole, the Department of Corrections supervises the parolee. They have some, if they do run afoul, they have some options, which is to either emergency arrest the parolee if they feel like they've done something egregious and need to be incarcerated. They can submit a violation. We can have a violation hearing while they're still in the community. Or if they have absconded, they can request an arrest warrant to be issued, and I then review the case and decide if I'm going to issue an arrest warrant for that individual or not. But the parole board doesn't come into play until that formal violation has been filed. Prior to that, it's all DOC supervision. Is that what I'm hoping I answered your question?
Yeah, no, that's very good. Thank you.
Yep.
So can I follow up on Rob's question? So are there cases in which none of those things are done? In other words, there is no,
Yeah.
so an individual violates their parole and no action is taken.
Sometimes, yes, depending on what evidence is presented. I mean, there's times where they allegedly violate their parole, they come before the board, and the board may find there's not enough evidence to prove that they actually violated their parole. There could be times where stuff slips through the crack. But the thing I want to also touch on too is that we have a lot of parolees that are out in the community that are doing exceptionally well. And we often sometimes see those prior to the end of because there is another part of our chapter in the statutes for early termination and early discharge. So if they've been doing really well, we have policies and procedures around where they could potentially be early discharged from their parole as well. So I don't want to put all the focus on the negative and the violations because we have so many that are out there doing really well too. Also, parole is another gateway to the interstate compact. So if somebody has family in another state or has opportunities in another state where they might do better than if they were supervised in Vermont, we could transfer them to that other state through the interstate compact as well. We see that a lot too, where it might return folks to their family or they have better opportunities because sometimes we have people who come to Vermont, do something, and then they have no ties and it's not really in their best interest to put them back in a Vermont community.
So can I just follow up on more? I don't mean to get down this road very deeply, but a lot of individuals, when I read the media, Springfield, Massachusetts, Holyoke, Massachusetts, drug-related crimes. So they don't have any ties. Well, allegedly are dealing drugs in Vermont, but are domiciled in Massachusetts, two communities in particular. So describe for me what happens with those individuals.
I think it really depends on the situation. I don't know exactly. I don't see all of those cases per se. I do see some of our folks, our parolees go down there and we pick them up. They get arrested down there and we end up extraditing them back here. But I think in those cases, it would be a case of if they didn't have any ties to Vermont and they were eligible to be released to the community, it's going to look at what's the best case plan for them. And Department of Corrections does a lot of that. They do the release planning prior to them coming before the board. And if it was in their best interest, you would probably apply to interstate compact them back to Massachusetts where they are from.
Okay. And I'll just mention one last thing and I'm done chatting about this subject. I hear from a lot of people in the communities, they maybe are not as sophisticated or as polite about how they converse about these situations. But they are concerned that it seems like a lot of individuals from those two communities in particular, that's where it states where they're from. And, you know, I think there's cases down in Rutland, if I'm not mistaken, in Rutland County, and I'm not picking on Rutland County, but where there are drugs being dealt with or sold, et cetera, they are distributing it, et cetera, and the community sees something and goes, why aren't these people in jail? Why aren't they, you know, under supervision, et cetera? Okay, that's all I want.
I think that's a larger justice system issue, is where the ending, we're kind of the ending point of the justice system. So I think that's a bigger system-wide issue potentially, as there's so many aspects to get them to us.
So I will say that when we were working on justice reinvestment, which has been happening now for 10 years, and changes are being made slowly, but Mary Jane was very helpful in getting the statutes so that they really reflected the issues with furlough and parole and probation and how when you move people around and how you treat them and stuff. And so I just want to thank you for that, because that was really helpful, and it probably isn't perfect yet, but it keeps getting worked on. And I think it's in much better shape than it was 12 years ago, certainly. So, yeah, Brian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just had a couple of things. The frequency of the meetings at about nine times a month.
Yep.
How much of that is dealing with parole violations versus people who are eligible to be coming up for parole? Does the board meet and consider kind of both circumstances at the same time? And what triggers it? How many parole violations, for instance, do you have to get before you say we better have a hearing? Or is each individual situation?
So I think it's to kind of take in piecemeal, to look at your second question. Depending on the violation, I think it's really the circumstances behind the individual. And DOC has a sanctioning grid that they follow when they're doing their violations. I think it also depends on what is the violation. Is it a matter of did they mistreatment, or is it they committed a new crime? Really looking at the severity of what the alleged violation is as well. The nine hearings that we have a month, we have 3 weeks of hearings, 3 days a week. They're for the most part site specific, but now that we're doing them via Microsoft Teams, we have a lot more flexibility, so we can see folks quicker or if we need to. But each hearing day is it's a bunch of different hearings. So we have eligibility hearings, we have early termination hearings, we have reprimand hearings, we have violation hearings. It really depends on what is submitted to us. So the Department of Corrections will submit parole summaries for parole hearings or other documents, violations, or so forth, and that's how our schedules are determined. So really, anybody at any time could go on our website and get the link for our hearings and jump on if they wanted to, because they are public open meetings.
So it seems as though you're pretty busy, and I'm wondering whether the 8 members, this becomes sort of a job at some point.
It is somewhat a professional. Right now, I think with the caseload, the 8 members can juggle it, or the 7 members can juggle it. But as justice reinvestment, as presumptive parole and the number of parolees expands, and we may have to look at that some way down the road of, is this more of a professional board where we need it more either semi-full-time or full-time. But right now, I think it's manageable the way it is. Each board is consisted of 3 members. So each hearing day has 3 members.
Okay.
And the chair sets up those schedules every month of which members are going to be together. So that way we have a quorum of 3.
Thanks very much.
Yep.
I want to follow up on Senator Collimore's question, because compared to most boards and commissions that have come before us, the parole board has a very hefty
Yeah.
workload. And so what is the chair's role? I mean, the chair is paid $20,500 and then everybody else gets $100 per diem. Can you describe the difference in the workloads between the chair and the other members?
Sure. The chair and I work hand in hand a lot on issues. So if there's any legal issues that come up, the chair will meet with our legal counsel. He does the scheduling. If there's issues that come up with oftentimes there's cases he may have to review ahead of time, or a lot of times we will get requests for postponements for violation hearings. He will review those cases and decide if a postponement should be granted or not. He's basically available most of the time. And if I have any questions or we work on policies together, he interviews if we have staff vacancies, because we're an office of 3 full-time staff. He will help with those interviews. He will help me with some staffing issues and so forth.
And is there a lot of work between hearings for the members?
There's preparation for the hearings. So most of our dockets are between 12 and 15 cases. So generally the day before the hearings or somewhere in the vicinity of those hearings, they will review the parole summaries that were submitted, the violation reports that were submitted, to help them draft what their line of questioning may lead them to during the hearings. So they have a lot of potential reading of reports, maybe a day's worth of work, depending on how many cases we're hearing. But generally it's 12 to 15 in a hearing day.
Wow. I mean, that's a fair amount of
It is.
work.
I guess my other question would be, is 7 enough? I assume that's set by statute.
It is set by statute. We have statute has 5 board members and 2 alternates, but we treat all 7 as essentially the same, and we use them all the same.
Do you think 7 is a good number?
I think it's good right now. I think if we expand, we may need to look at do we need more members, or do we need to look at compensation and look at making them more, maybe closer to the chair,
Okay.
more temporary or hourly kind of thing.
So you do feed, I'll use my language. Okay, so in a different commission, environmental, 3 commissioners, the commission has 3 members, and then there are 4 alternates, and the choice of how to use those is up to the chair of that particular commission. It sounds to me like you're saying you have 5 full-time members or 5 members and 2 alternates, and you feed the alternates in an equal capacity. Is that?
I believe that's how the chair does it, scheduling. Everybody has about the same amount of hearings, except for the chair and the vice chair have more hearings, because one of them has to be at each hearing to chair the hearing. Sometimes the chair and the vice chair are on the same hearing, but most of the time, it's one or the other that are chairing the hearings.
Thank you.
Any more questions, concerns? I think maybe we might consider maintaining the parole board.
I would so move.
Should we vote on that just to make sure?
Want to wait and have the discussion?
No, I just had a question. Sorry, Madam Chair.
Sorry, yes, please. Sorry.
I have to say, I read through this and I knew that the parole board was active. I have to say, I did not realize that kind of quite the workload that it appears that you have. But I have to say, there's a part of it that strikes me is that it seems like that the parole board is doing a lot of work that, for somebody who doesn't really know what's going on, would be done and should be done by the Department of Corrections. As far as making a lot of final determinations. And what happened before?
I think, so going back in a lot of this is before my time at the parole board or at the Department of Corrections, because I did come from the Department of Corrections prior to the parole board, is the parole board was part of the Department of Corrections back, I think, prior to 2005. However, it was determined that there was a need for an impartial body to make some of these decisions, because there was a lot of I believe there was a lot of influence, and there was a lot of lines being blurred and crossed prior to that. But it's nice to have especially with violations, having an impartial body come in and look at the case with kind of a fresh set of eyes, without because sometimes you can have culture mixed in as well. Also, policies and procedures it's really just an impartial body, kind of like a court with probation violations, looking at the case, determining the factors, versus having set policies by the Department of Corrections to make determinations.
Okay, thank you.
A quick question. This is one I should actually know the answer to, and maybe you do, and I'm asking it for the benefit of maybe my future, but when the time comes, if the time comes that you do decide you need more bodies on the board, what is the way to go about that? Do you know, or do we know, or go back to the legislature for?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that Mary Jane is pretty on top of going back to the legislature for changes, along with DOC. I think that in the parole board, I mean, I think it's
I could just see that being a question I would get one day and me going, so.
yeah,
thank you.
it would be a legislative change that changed either the compensation or the number of people.
Thank you.
So just a question about the per diems. You put in here $100 per diem for each day of official duties. So are you paying them the per diem, not just for hearings, but for when they're reviewing records? Okay, good.
With the new statute that's coming into play in 2023, that there was the board statute got changed for the per diems, and now that it's going to be set through the budgetary process. I'm not sure if our per diems will change or not. So that's something I need to work on with our financial division and also the governor's office to see how that's all going to come into play with the next fiscal year budget.
Well, I would say that of all the boards and commissions we have reviewed so far, this is by far the busiest.
Yep, sure.
And it has the heaviest workload.
Maybe they should share some of that out to the other commissions that aren't so busy.
I don't think so.
Side.
Okay, I'm just checking. Maybe they need some additional help and we'll share it.
So I would move that we retain.
I'll second that.
Okay. We want to vote on that one. All those in favor of maintaining.
Can I ask one quick question before we go?
Oh, my God.
I know, I'm such a,
Sure.
as the chair had said, are there any changes in current statute that would help? Any changes? Because there is an opportunity here that,
I think, right, the only potential change, and that's something we're working out, we're working with our legal counsel right now to try to I don't remember the exact number of the statute, but there is a part, and I think it's in the violation portion, where if we are, right now we share an assistant attorney general with the Department of Corrections, and which kind of develops a conflict of interest. And we're working with that team right now to potentially look at different counsel for the board, so we are independent. It's in the very infancy stages. If that is the case, if we were to get counsel that does not have that conflict, there is one portion of the violations, I think it's in the violations, that the board, any training that the board receives from their legal counsel, the prisoner's rights office must be present for that training. And that sometimes can pose a conflict for the board, because they feel like they can't necessarily speak openly with their attorney or obtain training without the defense counsel there listening and potentially trying to train alongside. So that becomes a little bit of a conflict. That may be something we may be coming forward in the next legislative session, depending on what our counsel situation looks like.
that's a much bigger issue than what we're probably
Yeah,
to deal with here.
that would be the judiciary committees.
Ready to vote, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Can I ask one final question? This is just for my own benefit. So each person seeking parole has access to an attorney or can have access to an attorney.
If they've, only for violations, so if they're requesting parole, they don't have an attorney. They just come forward with their DOC caseworker or their probation parole officer, depending on if they're in the field or the facility, and they present their plan of where they're gonna reside, what their treatment's gonna look like, what their plan is for their, if they were to be placed on parole.
Okay, and here's my real question. Are the attorneys pro bono? So for example, the Vermont
Bar Association.
legal.
Legal aid?
Whatever they are.
Prisoners' rights,
No,
Legal aid?
rights.
legal aid.
No, the attorneys group, the group that,
Vermont Bar Association.
what's that?
Vermont Bar Association?
Yes, the Bar Association, okay, so thank you, I appreciate that. So the Bar Association likes attorneys to provide pro bono services as part of their, participation to society, et cetera. So my question is, that's why I was asking, are they pro bono? In other words, who's paying for this? Who's paying for the legal services? If it's an attorney that the Vermont Bar Association has recommended and as part of their service is pro bono, that's great. That's even better. That person has access to legal services at no cost or a minimal cost.
99%, I would say 99% of the parolees that face the board for a parole violation hearing are represented by the Prisoner's Rights Office, which is part of the Defender General's Office. They are full-time state employees to the Defender General's Office.
Okay, so there are no, if I finish this up, there are no pro bono people showing up.
There may be in that 1%, if somebody brings their own private attorney. I don't know who is paying for that. I don't know if the parolee is paying for it or if they're getting it pro bono. We don't ask those questions.
All right, I'm done.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank
Oh, did we have a vote?
No, we didn't.
We sort of
Oh,
We had a
because we
motion.
got interrupted by a couple questions.
had 4/5 of a vote.
Okay, okay, we want to have an official vote. All in favor of maintaining the parole board?
Aye.
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 Okay, all right, thank you.
Survive.
I still have a job. Thank you.
A busy one, too.
Appreciate it.
Sorry to have kept you.
But it not only is good to look at the boards occasionally, but this was actually educational also. So
Absolutely.
the more people understand how this functions, the better off we are.
Now, I've been here before and we eliminated VTER, the Vermont Tobacco and Evaluation Review Board.
Oh, yes,
On
okay.
my boards.
I thought you looked familiar. Yes, so
Bad about that we, no,
were
okay.
you nervous we were going to?
I would be a little nervous about not having the parole.
I think we all would.
It'd be some significant legislative change coming up, I think.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. See you later.
All right, I think we're running a little behind ourselves. But I don't have a clock, and there's no clock in this room, so
9:35,
what?
9:35.
Ooh, we are behind ourselves.
Should have asked you fewer questions.
We have the Vermont Program for Quality in Healthcare, and Kelly Doherty is with us on Zoom. Good morning. Welcome, Kelly, and I don't know if you know all of us, so we'll just introduce ourselves because you weren't here when we did before. So I'm Jeanette White from Windham County.
I'm Representative John Gannon from Wilmington, representing Halifax, Whitingham, and Wilmington.
I'm Rob Leclerc, representing Barry Town.
I'm Matt Kraus. I'm one of the gubernatorial appointees.
Senator Collmore from the Rutland District.
I'm Tracy DeLude. I'm the governor's appointments director and the other gubernatorial appointee.
And the other people with us in the room are Ameren, our legal counsel, and Andrea, our taker care of us. So welcome here and
you.
thank you. And we did get some information and we understand, just so that you can tell us kind of what it's a little bit different than the other boards and commissions that we're dealing with. We understand that, but we just wanted to have a better understanding of it.
Sure. So the Vermont Program for Quality in Healthcare is not actually a board or a commission. It's a nonprofit organization that through the legislation, the health department contracts with VPQHC, as we call it, to sort of be the entity that is a statewide healthcare sort of quality improvement resource. So what they do under contract with us is they engage in a lot of activities with hospitals around the state. So they convene regular meetings with all of the hospital's quality directors. So every hospital has a quality point person. And so they bring those folks together quarterly to learn from each other, talk about best practices around healthcare quality initiatives. So they facilitate those meetings, and they also sort of provide a resource in a portal through their website where quality directors can share information, protocols, processes. They also assist hospitals with required federal healthcare quality reporting. So there's a national health safety network where hospitals submit quality data. So VPQHC will provide technical assistance to hospitals in reporting that data. And also the Act 53 hospital community report cards. They assist with those. And they also, and this really beefed up during the pandemic, understandably, but they also facilitate a statewide telehealth group to sort of look at best practices, how best to deliver high quality telehealth services. So they bring folks together from across the state to sort of expand the availability of telehealth across the state. And they're a great resource for our healthcare providers, particularly our hospitals, in sort of ensuring quality healthcare. So that's in a nutshell what their role is.
Thank you. Any questions for people? I think that this is a slightly different animal, and we appreciate hearing more about it. But since it was on our list of boards and commissions, we felt we should at least learn what it was.
Yeah. No, they're a great resource.
Rob?
And I meet with them quarterly to just review what they're doing, and they submit reports to us. The legislation, the statute says that they need to report to the health department annually, but they actually submit reports to us quarterly. And then at every year end.
Rob, did you?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning.
Good morning.
So is this group comprised of people who are primarily just in the medical profession?
Actually, the organization is staffed by not necessarily medical folks, but people who have expertise in healthcare quality, which is a whole sort of discipline in and of itself. So I don't know offhand how many staff they have. I think it's about 6. They're a pretty small organization. But they're led by an executive director, and then they have several staff, and as a nonprofit organization, they have a board of directors. But most of the staff are not clinicians. They are people who have expertise in quality.
They have a staff of 10.
Right. Well, I guess what's prompting my question here is we're talking about quality in healthcare. And it seems like I'm not hearing much about the end user having input into that, and that's the customer or the patient. It seems like that there's an awful lot of committees and groups set up to talk about like quality in healthcare in a variety of different capacities. But it seems like they talk a lot amongst themselves. And, well, I'll just touch briefly. I had an interaction with one of our larger healthcare networks in the state that left me extremely dissatisfied. And I did sort of go up through the chain, and once again, it was always about what worked best for the institution as opposed to what was really good for the patient. And I've been around this industry long enough, peripheral, that I'm not very encouraged by that it's as patient-centered as some would portray it to be.
Well, the role of VPQHC is really to work with the hospitals. To what they do is they really look at outcome data. So they look at things like hospital acquired infections, and there are lots of different metrics that are sort of developed, some of them federally, that are indicators of like quality of care that's provided. And so they will assist hospitals with sort of gathering the data and, you know, examining their processes around quality. So it's a little bit more, it's not like incident by incident, although they, outside of the 9416, which is what we're talking about here, there's also a patient safety initiative that that we work with VPQHC on, where they assist hospitals in reporting incidents that affect patient safety in hospitals. So, you know, if somebody is injured or there's some sort of mistake that's made, they have to report those things to the health department, and VPQHC helps them to address those issues.
Do they look at retention or turnover in the healthcare field?
They don't, but we do at the health department through our Office of Rural Health and Primary Care. So we look at workforce on a regular basis, the healthcare workforce in Vermont, but that's not part of VPQHC's role.
Very good. Thank you.
Did you have a question?
I have a quick question. It's slightly related to this, but what is the turnover overall for Vermont hospitals? And the reason I ask that, I used to work at a hospital and I worked in human resources, and I remember certain classifications of jobs were astronomical. I mean, just constant turnover.
Yeah, I don't know that off the top of my head, but I could certainly get that information. I know that the healthcare sector, you know, has really not been immune to sort of the great resignation that we've seen in so many industries. But I could look into that and certainly provide some information through Andrea.
It's not, if you'd like to, that's fine, but it's not crucial. I was just curious how much it's changed. Thank you.
Any more questions for Kelly? Thank you for joining us, and we're sorry that we got a little late there.
Oh, no worries.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Now we're ahead of schedule.
The advantage of joining on Zoom is that you can continue to
work
while we're running late. So now we're ahead of ourselves. All right, so what time is it right now? Do we have time to do it?
9:46.
46.
So we have 15 minutes. Do we want to look at one of the other, you have draft agendas for us for the next couple meetings. Should we start looking at those and just see? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea.
So Tracy, if you watched just the other day, the other meeting, we kind of tried to map out our whole summer here so we could get through things.
I was really glad Andrea was paying attention because I got lost way too
Thank
many
you.
times.
Well, I was glad she was paying attention too, because I just went back and looked at my notes and here's mine.
Similar to that.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. So let's look at the one for the September meeting that we looked at and see if that still makes sense.
So which one are we looking at?
September 21st.
It's our next meeting.
Okay, got it.
It'll be a busy day.
It will be.
Well, a couple of them shouldn't take much. Natural gas and oil resource board, not too big, about a minute.
Just raise a question that I have. I know we've made a practice of either at least sending out the questionnaire or having a conversation about every board. But let's say, for instance, like the State Labor Relations Board, there probably isn't much question that we're going to approve its continued existence. Do we really even need to take testimony? I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah. I think
Board of
that's,
Liquor Lottery was just stood up here a few years ago.
I think those are legitimate questions that whether we need to have an hour for the State Labor Relations Board.
But there's also
I
the
think,
question of, should there be changes?
Yeah,
That's-
legislative changes.
Well, but, and that's an excellent point. But wouldn't they, in the responding to the questionnaire, touch on that if there was changes, and then you might take the testimony?
On that particular,
Potentially, yeah.
so, and liquor lottery, where do we have them here?
11:30.
10:30 on the 20th.
Oh, yeah, 11:30, I see. And that was, my guess is that there's not going to be much legislative change needed there because they were just,
Right, stood up.
the legislation was just put in place. So I don't, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know that we need to.
Well, because the other part of this, what I was thinking is that there are some that we clearly need to, and well, because this is the last time that, at least this calendar year, not the last time we're going to meet, but this group, we've got a limited amount of time to get through.
We
a lot of
do.
boards.
We do, and some of them, like the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank and the VPIC, I don't know that we really, I mean, we just made changes to VPIC.
Right, we just stood up as an independent commission.
Yeah, so if there are ones on here that we think that we don't need to hear from, and that if we send the questionnaire and emphasize the part about any potential changes, then we can decide if we want to hear from them or not. Does that make sense? Or would you just I would just cross off VPIC. I wouldn't even send them a questionnaire.
Oh, I think it would be good just to have a check-in to see if
Okay.
it's working as it's supposed to and whether they need any
Okay.
resources that
Okay.
when we first stood it up, we'd be
didn't
able
see.
to consider.
Okay,
Like the Cannabis Control Board. I mean, that's been,
Right, they're struggling a little.
Right.
So I mean,
yeah, okay, all right, you're right.
I would agree that I think everybody should get the questionnaire and hopefully would respond to it. And then depending on their response, whether that's the end of the story or if there's further action that's required that maybe, we could and should weigh in on.
Yeah, questions 6 and 8 in our questionnaire are intended to sort of elicit some of that
Feedback.
Are there changes that we should be making, that kind of thing? So to John's point, it is important that they answer it. I don't know whether the co-chairs want to take a look at the questionnaires, and then if they're satisfied that we don't need to have people come before the board or commission, that's fine. If not, have them come and check in. I can go either way.
I appreciate your point. I think we can indicate to the folks who are going to testify, that we'd like to keep the conversations as short as possible if there's anything that really needs to be discussed. We do have a new member on the Sunset Advisory Commission, and it might be valuable just to have them check in. So.
So how would you suggest that we do this? That we look at the ones that we might just check them, like liquor and lottery. Should we
Right, and VPIC.
have a VPIC? Most of the ones from the treasurer's office, I think are probably not ones that we're going to eliminate. I mean, I don't think we want to eliminate the Teachers Retirement Board of Trustees.
Probably.
We might want to look at, is it questions 6 and 8?
Those are just two that I
Those.
saw that made sense to get answers for.
For me, it would be what the response is to the questionnaire.
Okay.
In other words, like the Teacher Retirement Board, I kind of agree with you that it's probably don't need to. Yes, it can require a little time and effort on their part. I get it, maybe a lot, but like say, for instance, I don't know, the Emergency Personnel Survivors Benefit Review Board. I have absolutely no idea other than if I take the name as presented, but what is it? What does it do?
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, but based on the answer on the questionnaire.
I sort of know what it does.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Well, so people who are emergency personnel in state government, if they die in service, there's a benefit review process for their survivors.
Yep. So that's the one. Okay, that's the board that has
Yeah.
oversight over that.
So I think it was also folks who were dying or terminal? No?
It's just, well,
It's like first responders that like,
oh, you mean like people who
So my brother-
suffered from 9/11, for example, who had,
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
but you have to be an emergency personnel
Okay. Yep.
in order to. So,
I'd like to talk about the retirement board for state employees. That has some particular interest to me. So I'd be happy to have them come on in and just tell me we're solvent and.
well, they're not going to tell you whether they're solvent or not. That's not our job.
He's going to ask.
Well, that's not really in our
It's not,
realm.
right. Our realm is to determine whether the board should exist or not. It's,
I'm going to vote for that.
so anyway, I see Cindy is with us. So let's think about that a little more. We have time this afternoon. I just thought maybe we could jumpstart here a little bit. But Cindy, do you want to join us?
Morning.
Good morning, Cindy. I don't know if it's been a long, long time since I've seen you and had contact with you. It was, and I appreciate the work that you do.
Thanks.
So we will introduce ourselves and then we'll get started. So I'm Jeanette White from Windham County.
John Gannon, representing Halifax, Whitingham, and Wilmington in southern Vermont.
Claire Berrytown.
I'm Matt Kraus. I'm one of the gubernatorial appointees.
Brian Collmore, representing Rutland County in the Senate.
I'm Tracy Blewett. I'm the governor's appointment director and the other gubernatorial appointee.
So our job here is to look at all the boards and commissions and should they continue to exist? Are they the place that's best suited to do their job? And if they should continue to exist, are there changes that need to be made to reflect the current situation as opposed to maybe when they were set up 10, 20, 40 years ago? So with that, if you would like to just talk to us about the Palliative Care and Pain Management Task Force, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm the director of the Vermont Ethics Network. I also am a clinical ethicist there, and I work part-time as a clinical ethicist at UVM Medical Center, just so that y'all know kind of who I am and what I do. So back in 2009, I had just come to the Vermont Ethics Network, and we were in the midst of kind of figuring out how we're doing as a state with regard to access to good end-of-life care services, including palliative care, pain management for people who are at the end of life and beyond. And there was a desire and a request from both the House Human Services Committee and the Senate Health Care Committee if Vermont Ethics Network, as a freestanding not-for-profit, we're not a state agency, would be willing to voluntarily coordinate a task force that would be looking broadly across the state at issues related to end-of-life care and pain management. Since that time, obviously, pain management has taken on its own world and life because of all the issues with opioids and diversion and all of those things. And so I think we don't tend to do as much. In the very early stages of the task force, we did more looking at pain management more broadly. But since pain is its own thing now, a very, and huge actually, so it's beyond kind of the scope. So we do continue to look at pain as it relates to end of life and making sure that people who are at the end of life have good access to appropriate pain management as needed to support their care. But the focus of my work probably has shifted a bit since 2009 to be more exclusively focused on palliative and end-of-life care and how that looks across Vermont and how we're doing as a state with regard to making sure people have access to this care and services when they need it, and providers have access to good education and ongoing education, as is the demands of the profession. And so that's sort of the focus of the work that I do. And every year I submit a report to the legislature and specifically to House Human Services and Senate Health and Welfare that kind of outlines what's going on across the state as it relates to these issues. Periodically since that time, we have had policy recommendations related to what we've learned about how things are going. Not every year, we've probably only come to the legislature a handful of times since 2009 to say, we've tried to solve these issues, except that now the only way this one gets fixed is with a legislative intervention. And so we've done that periodically throughout the years, and providing this report gives us the opportunity to signal to those committee members what's going on and the rationale for why we think now's the time to make such a legislative fix, if indeed that's what we want to do. And I have to say, every time we've come to this body for requests to update and modify our laws to improve access to palliative and end-of-life care and advanced care planning, this body has always responded favorably to those requests. And I think you have a long-standing history of really being proactive when it comes to making sure Vermonters have access to good end-of-life care and are afforded all the rights and privileges that they should be related to being self-determining and deciding for themselves what will and will not be done at times when they lack capacity. So that's pretty much the work of the task force and what we've been doing. This question came up to me, I bet it's almost 10 years ago now, where they said, we're sunsetting reports. Like after 5 years, you don't have to continue to provide these reports. But I was asked at that time by the committee members if I'd be willing to continue to do this work and continue to provide them the reports because they found it useful and informative and allowed them to, be connected to the work that's happening and that they've spent so many years prioritizing on the legislative side. So I agreed to continue to do it, and that's what I've been doing since then.
So I just have a question that doesn't necessarily, I mean, it is related to this, but so do you have any role in, I remember when we were looking at, should we tell doctors that they can only prescribe so many opioids for pain, or there was a huge discussion with the medical community around that. And in the end, there were some changes that were made, but were not directive, but were suggestive. And I think it did make a difference in the prescribing habits of doctors. But I just wondered if you, since that, if the pain management task force was involved in that discussion.
We were, and we continued to advocate to make sure that there were appropriate carve-outs as it related to end-of-life care. As we know, people who are dying should not have to earn their medication, their pain management, nor can they always go every 3 days to refill. You know, there needed to be some specific carve-outs related to hospice patients, people who are at home on hospice or in their place of residence who are dying, who need to have symptom management as sort of the priority for people who are on hospice, and to make sure that they had access to appropriate pain meds as needed to manage their end-of-life needs. And so we were involved in that, and we made some modifications and worked with the Department of Health on some of the criteria had to do with information that's provided to patients who are receiving pain management. So we made some modifications that were more specific to people who are on palliative and hospice programs, just to make sure it aligned with their care needs, which are quite different from people who are suffering from chronic pain. And so we needed to make those distinctions, and our group was involved in that and streamlining and working with the department to make sure we were addressing the needs of folks who are at end of life.
Thank you. Any questions or concerns, comments? I think that I really appreciate the work that is being done. And I do remember when, and I don't remember, it was 2009, but it was, Vermont was, speaking of end of life, Vermont was ranked 49th or 50th in terms of having advanced care directives, or, and we were so far down. And I remember at the time Jim Leddy was chair of health and welfare, and he said, we don't have time to take it on. And Kevin Mullen and I were both on the committee, and we took it on and we changed it and worked with people. And Vermont then was rated like 4th or 5th in terms of our the way we dealt with advanced care directives, and wrote them up and have them available in hospitals and stuff. So
and you're continuing to do so. I mean, you certainly led the way when it came to creating a registry for folks who completed advanced directive to submit their documents, so there'd be ready access to those documents across the state when they're admitted or come into the hospital when they lack decision-making capacity. So that continues to be, and where those numbers are growing exponentially in the registry. So we now, as the Ethics Network, we now oversee the contract with the registries. The Department of Health has asked us to do that on their behalf, because it was one thing when there was 5,000 people in the registry. When there's 50,000 people in the registry, the majority of whom are over the age of 60, and we're talking about an online interface, there's a lot of management that needs to go into that now. And so we are doing that work now for the Department of Health to make sure that people have access to those documents. And I spend a lot of time, I have someone in my office that works on the community side, and then I spend a lot of my time working with providers to make sure that their systems are in place, to make sure that they're looking, they're checking, and then they're implementing these documents to the degree that they apply. So you're continuing to do really good work, I think, as a state, as it relates to advanced directives. And then I think that palliative care and hospice work is just a continuation of that, more towards the end of life, and making sure that people have access to those services statewide as they are needed.
I just have one quick question. I think I know what an MPA is. What is an MSB?
So I have a master's in public administration and a master's in bioethics with a certification in clinical ethics and
Bioethics.
health policy and law.
Okay, I just never seen those. I've seen an MPA, I have not seen the other one, so.
Yeah, we're a bit like a zebra, you know, where there's not ethicists on every street corner. So we're a little bit unique in that regard.
Okay.
Do most of the hospitals have ethicists?
No.
No.
All of the hospitals have ethics committees. They're required by CMS standards to have a mechanism within their facility to manage ethics questions as they come up. And ethics questions are just inherent in clinical medicine. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anybody did anything wrong. It's just that sometimes it's difficult to know what the right path is, just because the options are none of them are good. I think ethicists are often called to figure out what's the least bad option when we don't have a lot of good options in front of us. UPM is the only hospital that has paid ethicists, trained ethicists on staff serving in that role. We do individual consultation there. But I work with my Venn hat on, supporting the ethics needs of all of the other hospitals in Vermont, helping to train their members of their ethics committees, and then being available to respond to ethics questions when they feel like there's something that is beyond the scope of what their ethics committee can handle. And so I'm accessible to those facilities as well as non-hospital facilities, because ethics questions come up just in the course of caring for patients and families. You don't have to be in the hospital. You can be in a nursing home or receiving home health services when there's a conflict, or not even a conflict, but really just a question about what's the right thing to do here. We're kind of stuck. And so that's the role that I play at the Ethics Network. In addition to doing a lot of the advanced directive and decision-making work and the palliative care work, I also provide the ethics resource for facilities of all stripes when those questions come up.
Great.
So I was just reading Act 25 and how is the task force funded? Because there's language in there that's contingent upon the ability of the task force to secure funding.
Yeah.
You're still in existence.
Yes, it's not really funded. I mean, I'm a 501c3 not-for-profit, so I have to fundraise. So I do all the policy and education work. That's one hat I wear, but I'm also the development director for my organization because we are an organization of me and one other part-time staff person.
Oh, wow.
So we're very small when we have a very large scope, as you can tell. But I have a very forward-thinking and proactive board who believes that this is really important work and integral to the mission of the organization. And so I find funds. I seek out private donor funds as well as grant funds. I have one grant contract through the Office of Rural Health to provide the educational offering that we do at least annually. Last year we did a virtual series because there was not going to be an annual meeting. And we'll probably do a virtual series and an in-person meeting maybe in the spring if we can swing it. And so I have some funding through the Office of Rural Health to do that piece of the work. That's at least one annual educational offering. And then I have other, sources of income that I try to use to try to support these needs. So we're not funded explicitly as a task force for this work.
I see.
Any more questions or comments or? Thank you.
Sure. So, we're happy to keep submitting this report. I haven't reached out to the committee chairs to see if this is something they still want us to do in a few years. So I don't know what.
I think that our role is only to look at whether the boards and commissions or task forces should continue to exist, and if they should, are there legislative changes that need to be made? But in terms of submitting the reports and stuff, I think that would be the healthcare committees that you would be meeting with on that. And none of us are on a healthcare committee, so.
Right.
And in fact, 3 of us aren't coming back at all.
It's bigger and bigger.
Yes.
Reading through your report here, Cindy, I just was the members of the task force, are they also doing dual duty as members of the board, or is the task force is totally separate?
Totally separate. I don't know that I have any right now. It's.
I didn't see anything about that.
Yeah, it's not like a limited group. Like, I'm happy to collaborate and partner with anybody that wants to be part of this work. I think it allows us to exchange information across the state, share what's working, what's not working. And so pretty much there's no one here that I believe right now is currently even on my board. These are all people who are separate. They're either part of associations that are doing some of the overlapping work. And we will get changes every year as people, can and can't continue to stay on based on other commitments. But the demands on this group aren't that high. I mean, we meet a couple times a year, we map out our plan, we collaborate on the report submission, and we usually collaborate on what we think that's what helps me to figure out what the educational theme for the year should be, is finding out from the people who are at, front line doing the work to say, where are the issues and who can we bring to help support you? And then there'll usually be a subset of this larger group that will work on planning out and mapping out a conference and figuring out what topics we want to present and provide for educational offerings for that year.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Thanks for your good work.
Thank you.
All right. So is David joining us in person? Okay. So we're a little bit ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, we have over 15 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
Can I run to the men's room?
Yep.
No.
No.
Do we want to vote on that?
Aye.